So, continuing to raise perspectives, the first one is about the struggle, continuing struggle. Here, the context is Indian Army had approved the promotion of five women officers to the rank of colonel. So, again, as part of a larger goal towards bringing gender equality in the society, especially in the armed forces, Army had approved the promotion of five women officers to the rank of colonel. India's army approach towards gender neutral army, we can say in one sense. See, women are given shorter terms of service as compared to male soldiers and are given exemptions of for traditional roles of marriage and childbirth. This is the context in which the society operates largely. We have divided the roles in a patriarchal society. We have divided roles that traditionally the roles of marriage and childbirth, giving larger burden to women compared to men, and so this gender-based construct, is likely to be changed. So women are given short-term services, shorter terms of service as compared to male soldiers, and are given exemptions for traditional roles of marriage and childbirth. So this larger context we must see, but overall context in which we must put this issue is in terms of recent Supreme Court decision of increasing, allowing women to take up the NDA exam. That's one issue. And also last year, when a permanent commission was granted to women officers, and also both in Army as well as in Navy, in two back-to-back Supreme Court judgments. So this is the context in which we have to see this thing. And these are all efforts towards breaking the gender stereotypes. We can quote such examples in Ethics and Paper One. So moving forward, odd reward Tamil Nadu Lok Sabha seats. As we all know that India, there is a population imbalance, that is north-south divide exists in the population. So this always you must keep in mind that. And in this context, Madras High Court pointed out some important facts. Like Madras High Court reportedly described the reduction of Lok Sabha seats from Tamil Nadu as unfair and reasonable. So the southern states which have taken family planning measures, certain steps towards family planning, definitely have stabilized their population or controlled their population growth, and because of which their numbers in the Lok Sabha and state legislative assembly would be reduced. And this is a way of penalizing them for reducing their numbers would ultimately reduce their political power, because ultimately in parliament it's all about numbers, and the power struggle is all between numbers in a system we are in, first past the post system. So delimitation or redrawing the boundaries of the constituency is thus related to changes in the population size. Yes, delimitation is closely linked to population size. It reportedly suggested that, the Madras High Court suggested that Article 81 of the Constitution. So Article 81 of the Constitution, which mandates the ratio of the number of Lok Sabha seats and the population of a state should be same in all the states. So this ratio has to be kept uniform, because we have to balance all the regions. So this could be reviewed is what it is saying, because if you go in, as per the ratio, the states with lower population would get lower seats. UP, Bihar, who have higher population, will get higher seats. And here we are trying to, and they have not, northern states have not taken up any steps towards mitigating the population. So this is the context in which this has to be seen. Compensation too could be also considered for this, because they have controlled the population. Compensation can be in terms of financial compensation, or like one being an increase in Rajya Sabha seats against those lost in Lok Sabha. So this is one, this suggestion proposed by Madras High Court. Rajya Sabha seats cannot simply be equated to Lok Sabha once, obviously, because Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha are two different forums, so you cannot equate them. But this is one way, one proposal from Madras High Court. It also suggested monetary compensation apart from compensating towards Rajya Sabha. It suggested monetary compensation, reportedly fixing a notional amount of 200 crore for a legislator's contribution for 5 years. The loss of two members and 14 elections since 1967 meant Tamil Nadu should receive 5,600 crore. This is a rough calculation, nothing to be remembered here. But largely the issue of population, uh, differential population growth in the country, the north-south divide which exists in the population as well as in the fertility, this has to be seen in the larger context of, this issue has to be seen in the larger context of no differences, right? This has to be seen in larger context of how this would play out in the politics, their numbers being different in the parliament. So this is how, when the next delimitation episode is done, there could be chances where there will be reduction in seats of southern states compared to northern states. And yeah, and since it is all about numbers, so the numbers game might come in. Let's move forward. As we already discussed that there's a demand for caste census in the country. So why a demand for caste census in the country? no, is not apt in today's context. If you have to tell one line, you can just mention that even after 74 years of independence, progress is still predicated upon ascriptive identities. As we know, caste is an ascriptive identity. So it is not something which is based on achievement, it is based on ascription. Just by your birth, you get a caste. So, and still after 74 years of independence, we still are measured, if you are trying to measure progress, if the progress is still dependent on such backward identities, then India cannot progress forward, is one line of argument. And this is anathema to the principle of collective welfareism. So this is one line of thought for caste census. And then, as we know that, coming to the national asset monetization. So in the national asset monetization scheme, national asset monetization pipeline, which has been announced by the center, so unlocking the value of the assets which are underutilized, that is a key concern. So for example, the PP in a public private partnership concession agreement needs to be prepared for all sectors, right, that fall under the purview of this plan. Generally, we have such agreements or contracts ready for already existing for example, roads and airways. Already PPP models have been tried out in the country, and there's some bit of experience. But for other sectors which are included in the plan, not just roads, which is only such sectors, such a framework exists in place, but also railways, power, telecom, coal mining, natural gas, and shipping. So a PPP concession agreement, it needs to be prepared for all the sectors that fall under the purview of this plan. And then asset valuations, and risk and return sharing. So this is a key component. Asset valuation, how it will be done, whether there'll be overvaluation of asset or undervaluation of asset. So this also has to be taken care, because ultimately all this depends on the fair valuation. Where if the valuation is fair, then there'll be benefit for all the stakeholders. Asset valuation first thing, and then risk sharing and return sharing. So there should be optimum risk sharing and return sharing on the basis of the present value of future cash flows. So this assessment is also critical. This will obviously differ from the sector to sector, from road to railways to other telecom, etc. This will differ obviously. So only then can entities or financial investors, uh, they will come to invest in the national monetization pipeline through, it may be the any models, PPP models, such as TOT, toll operator transfer, or even the InvITs mechanism, InvITs route also, which is being used in the power sector, for example. So this is how, unlocking value in the national monetization pipeline is crucial. Next, moving on in the same lines, is about asset monetization. So asset monetization, continuing with the story, the biggest chunk in the asset monetization overall, it's estimated is about, it's 1.7 1.6 lakh crore out of the overall 6 lakh crore is expected to come from monetizing the overall 26,700 kilometer of existing national highways and new roads. So this is the biggest chunk in the asset monetization plan. So in civil aviation, the successful asset monetization of four major airports. Already we have successful examples for civil aviation, such as four major airports, for example, Mumbai and New Delhi, Hyderabad, and Bengaluru. These are thriving airports. Known for the customer friendly nature and top class services, has set the ball rolling has set the ball rolling for maximizing the gains, even as the scenario is starkly different in the power sector. So just must remember that from sector to sector, the level of assets monetized are different in the current context. So how a plan is being worked out towards all the sectors needs to be looked into in the future. So this is a key dimension, asset monetization in terms of mobilization of resources from men's perspective also. So moving forward, I'll just take one more in the same thing, managing the plan. So success of ambitious asset monetization program will depend on the institutional capacity. So it will depend on the institutional capacity and continuous monitoring. So at its core, the idea is to lease out the brownfield projects. Essentially, currently what we're trying to do is only to lease out the brownfield project as of now, brownfield projects, proceeds from which can be used to finance greenfield projects. So this idea overall that you get certain revenue out of it and you finance it to greenfield projects. It can be even the projects in the pipeline, which is the NIP, National Infrastructure Pipeline. The ownership of the assets monetized will remain with the government. So this is a key change with respect to the ownership. This is different from disinvestment, where disinvestment ownership is transferred to the private player, but here the ownership will still remain with the government, with the private players taking the operational risk. So that's why risk sharing becomes very important. Considering the experience of private players with PPPs, their comfort level in participating in these transactions is likely to depend on a host of factors. So what are these factors, if for which the private players depend? These are factors such as operational flexibility should be there. There should not be any rigidity. There should be operational flexibility. There should be a regulatory framework, a dispute resolution mechanism, should be put in place for such plans. So moving forward, another one in the same context is monetizing the assets the right way. So optimize the utilization of assets, ensure their maintenance. First is utilization. See, for any asset, what you must always try to connect is about their utilization. Any asset, maybe road or anything, just imagine about utilization. Then the maintenance of that asset comes, ensuring the maintenance, and then after maintenance comes providing high quality of service, maintaining that level and providing high quality of service. And after that, you try to improve efficiencies of operation and generate employment. This is the overall objective of any asset as we see. So in today's context, many assets are lying underutilized, are languishing. So that is why this plan has come up, so that this entire sequence of objectives are fulfilled. It is, getting the optimal utilization of assets, ensuring their maintenance, providing high quality of services, improving efficiencies of operation, and generating employment. So freeing up the government's own resources is critical for social sector spending. So once the assets are freed, once the government starts getting the revenue from this asset monetization, they can use such revenue for financing all the social sector programs, which will give a thrust to the welfare state. So some of the things which we need to consider is about, it must be pragmatic. The extent of success of this plan, national monetization plan, depends on four factors, such as value the assets fairly. As we already discussed, that valuation should be fair, should be fairly done, and there should be proper regulation and regulators. So regulatory regime in place, as well as it should be transparent. Not only regulation, the regulation should be transparent, it should be impartial, and it should have autonomy. Regulation body should have autonomy with least interference. And then, moving on to the autonomy perspective, the autonomy granted to the licensees and concessionaries to operate the asset and manage unions on their own terms. So this is autonomy which is necessary, because to carry on day-to-day operations, the assets involve high public interface in ones. So the kind of assets, if you see the nature of assets, all these are the ones which are having high public interface. For example, roads, railways, airports. All these are assets which have high public interface. So public has frequent interaction or involvement in such assets. So that perspective must be kept in mind. And for the ability of the government's think tank Niti Aayog to handhold ministries, because when you talk about all these assets, these assets have application across all ministries. So here the role of Niti Aayog as a think tank becomes critical in handholding ministries through this process. So this is one more dimension of the asset monetization pipeline. So moving forward, I just want to pick up again on the caste census. So caste census, this is about the Hindu editorial caste count on census and partisan politics. So as we know that in the country there is again a growing demand for a fresh caste census, getting louder, because caste census was last done in 1931. The colonial census was about creating and reinforcing castes and religious categories in the India. So why caste census was done in the first place? If we have to recount history, British did caste census only to divide India, to create more differences, to reinforce identity, to create a narrow identity over a national identity. So and then create differences in the society and this was a broader goal of divide and rule, which they employed. So the effective governance requires robust data on the governed. When we talk about caste census, here the crucial is the data perspective. So effective governance requires robust data. We need data on the governed. So salience of the caste as a fundamental marker of identity. Even today, caste is being the fundamental marker of Indian identity. It has grown only since independence. It has never declined. The role of caste, as we see, from post independence till the Mandal politics, it has only grown. So there's a democratization of society. As the society democratizes, as more and more people, as democracy reaches more and more people, questions are being raised regarding the status of Dalits, tribal communities. Even within the Dalits, within the tribal communities, various sections, the status has been questioned, whether are they able to progress on the same lines, are we able to realize the goals mentioned in the preamble, such things. It is assumed that particular groups within each category have benefited disproportionately from the political and job reservations, and there are demand for subquota. So in this context, what we can see is, since the reservation and the policy of reservation providing employment and education is solely based on caste, there is well recognized thing that certain sections have disproportionately benefited from the policy of reservation. So that is why there is a growing demand for the sub quota, because if you identify the sub quota, and within the caste you can identify people who are most backward, and then try to give benefits more for them. So this will in a way reduce the relative deprivation and provide some kind of empowerment for such backward communities. Some communities are feeling short changed by the affirmative steps taken, defining short. So role of government as a big employer. See what is happening in the post LPG era is, so earlier prior to LPG, government was the largest employer, but today in the post LPG era, it is not the government. The role of government as a big employer is diminishing, and that is why we see there is a demand for affirmative action in the private sector. We can see many states where they're trying to reserve seats in the private sector. So this is happening because of the changes which happened in the economy structurally. Public sector or the government is no more the largest provider of employment in that sense, and that's role is diminishing without. And government is hardly seen as a facilitator in today's context without adequate and reliable data, leading to conflicting and often misleading claims. So lack of data, you know, is a hindrance towards policy making in such a in policy formulation in this context. Supporters of caste census cite these reasons. Okay, these are the reasons why caste census is needed. Because when you have data, then you can properly target beneficiaries, proper the sub quota who are more backward. So this would address the imbalance within the caste. While skeptics, the other side of people are who are against caste census is taking into account the larger question that we discussed in other articles also. Skeptics fear is only widen social, because when you create more and more quotas, more and more sub quotas, you're dividing the society into various stratifications. This is against the unity and integrity of the nation. This is a larger argument. It can create social rifts and create further walls in the society. So what is not debatable, however, is the fact that inequitable distribution of power and wealth endangers the stability of any society. So, what we must always acknowledge is that if there is inequity in the society, if there is inequitable distribution of power and wealth in the society, it it will create instability in the society. Always, for a society to be stable, equitable, there has to be proper sharing of resources and benefits. So if that doesn't happen, then there can become conflicts can arise. The important perspective on the caste account. Lastly, this article argues why caste census is needed, and we have also discussed why it is not needed also. So both the perspectives, historical perspective we have seen. So moving forward, now, coming to this article on oil palm. So as we've discussed, center is going big time on oil palm cultivation plantation. So oil palm plant, but this article talks about the concern of oil palm plantation, that is the environmental concerns. The cabinet has approved, as we know, the new 11,000 crore national mission on edible oil palm to boost domestic production. So it has identified Northeast and Andaman and Nicobar Island for the project due to its favorable rainfall and temperature. As we know, there are certain agroclimatic conditions which are necessary for oil palm cultivation. So that is why this has become favorable rainfall, as it has favorable rainfall and temperature northeast and Andaman. Incidentally, these are also the biodiversity hotspot of the country. So there are objections raised by the India's top forest research institute. So India's top forest research institute, this we must always note that the Indian Council for Forestry Research and Education. So this body, the Indian Council of Forestry Research and Education, this had raised objections against introducing oil palms in biodiversity rich areas. So this is a top research body, forestry research body, the Indian Council for Forestry Research and Education. So this body has raised objections against introducing oil palm in biodiversity-rich regions. In 2002, also Supreme Court ordered the phasing out of all exotic plantations to conserve the island's ecology. That is the Andaman and Nicobar Island. This context was Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So Supreme Court ordered to phase out all the exotic plantations to conserve the island's ecology. And as we know today, we are the largest importer of vegetable oil. There's a huge demand for edible oils in the country. In 2021, we imported both crude and refined palm oil worth almost $5 to $6 billion. And then the government must learn from the experiences of other countries such as Sumatra, Borneo, and Malay Peninsula, where oil palm plantations, what it has done, it has eliminated the traditional pristine forest biodiversity. If you see the forest biodiversity, the traditional forest, the pristine forests, are also a mitigation towards climate change, because the act has carbon sinks, and it also has negative impact on the wildlife. So it also push out wildlife in that sense. So this must also be taken to care, the environmental concern. Rapid change in land use, so we're trying to change the land use towards palm oil, has also left a deep social impact, because these are all commercial crops. uh, Palm oil, we are kind of replacing the commercial crops, traditional crops with commercial crops, food crops with commercial cash crops. So it might have impact on social, social impact also in that sense. So this was about uh, oil palm thing. Last one is again about the asset monetization back into the news. So the Big Bang plan to monetize government assets, but will it work? This is apprehension which the in editorial is expressing. So the Big Bang plan to monetize government assets to raise and spend money for key infrastructure projects, which we already know. A pipeline of Sarkari assets will be monetized to generate as much as 6 lakh crore. So if you compare with the national infrastructure pipeline, that is 111 lakh crore. 60% of the funds will come from the assets such as roads, railways, and power. So out of the overall thing, it is 60% which is coming from roads, railways, and power sector. So national monetization plan covers as many as 20 different sectors of assets, and there are 12 different ministries involved. As we discussed, since there are 12 ministries involved, the role of Niti Aayog becomes crucial in handholding these ministries. Set aside, it is not just about funds. Yes, this point must be kept in mind that it is not only about revenue realization. It is not only about revenue realization because revenue can government can raise revenue from other means. It can raise bonds and bring out money, but the key reason why apart from revenue we have to see this plan is private players when they are brought in, they bring in more efficiency. So they make the existing government assets work efficiently and they enhance their value. So efficiency brings productivity, which enhances the value. And this is not a new idea because railways in Mumbai, take for example, the railways in Mumbai have allowed for technology parks above stations in Navi Mumbai. So in Navi Mumbai railway stations, there are technology parks above railway stations. So this is proper utilization of assets where in the transit corridors you can find workplaces. So transit corridors, workplaces, very because people who are establishing especially such technological parks, it will ease the commute, reduce the traffic, all such things. Also, these are the multiplier effects. Development rights for municipal bus yards have been sold to builders. So again, builders are there. The two important restrictions which are underlined are, as we know, the ownership will still remain in the government. So this is the key difference, that ownership is still in the government. This you already know. Only the existing brownfield projects are to be monetized as per them, because greenfield, anyway, new the values will be realized, but brownfield which have been sunk. That has taken up and will be handed back after contract period of lease over. So there are numerous imponderables. The actual worth of government. That's what no. The point is about fair evaluation, fair valuation. The actual worth of government assets will only be known after due diligence and market valuation. So this is the key point, because valuation will decide whether there will be any takers or not. Fair valuation will ensure that there are takers. Undervaluation or overvaluation are the concerns which we can foresee for this plan, and also legal disputes and bottlenecks created by competing government departments. So here the role of Niti Aayog again becomes important because otherwise this will paralyze plan. The legal disputes and the systemic bottlenecks, interministerial coordination, such role Niti Aayog has to anchor for this.